Good evening and a big welcome to everyone. My name is Jane Panetta. I'm the Fred and Nancy Pozis Curator and Director of the collection here at the Whitney. I'm very happy to share that tonight's event is being live captioned in English. You can enable these captions by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or on the three dots also at the bottom of your screen. And a thank you to Bonnie Rothermel and Sign Nexus for the live captioning. I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Munsee and Lenape and encourage everyone to take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous lands from where you're tuning in tonight. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's edition of Ask a Curator. This series provides an opportunity to hear directly from Whitney curators about their experiences organizing exhibitions at the museum, and then offers you the space to ask your own questions about the art, the artists, and the ideas behind the show. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel if you'd like to rewatch it afterwards or share. I'm particularly thrilled to introduce tonight's speakers, David Breslin, the DeMartini Family Curator and Director of Curatorial Initiatives, and Adrienne Edwards, the Engell Speyer Family Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs. They'll be sharing an inside look at the Whitney Biennial 2022, Quiet as It's Kept, which opened to the public on April 6th at the Whitney and will be on view happily through September 5th of 2022. Introduced in 1932 to chart developments in American art, the Biennial is the longest running exhibition of its kind. And in its 80th edition, the 2022 Biennial Quiet as It's Kept features the work of 63 artists and collectives. So very briefly, I'll give you a bio on these two incredible curators. I could spend the whole hour doing this, but I will not. From 2016 until 2019, David Breslin served as curator and director of the Whitney's collection and was recently appointed the museum's inaugural director of curatorial initiatives. Throughout his tenure at the Whitney, David has been a unique force in shaping and building the museum's collection, in addition to organizing focused collection shows such as the acclaimed Spilling Over and Where We Are. Alongside this critical work around the museum's collection, David was also the co-curator of the landmark exhibition David Warnerovich, History Keeps Me Awake at Night from 2018. Adrienne Edwards is the museum's Engell Speyer Family Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs. Since joining the Whitney in 2018, Adrienne has curated projects ranging from a survey of the musician and artist Jason Moran to our more recent Dave McKenzie exhibition featuring both a performance and a related collection installation by the artist. Prior to joining the Whitney, Adrienne worked as a curator at Performa and the Walker Art Center and has been a pioneering force within and around the intersection of performance, exhibitions, and museums. Adrienne will also serve as the chair for the international jury for the upcoming Venice Biennale opening next week. Like all of you, I'm sure, I'm looking forward to hearing more about the process of working on this extraordinary exhibition. I'll return later to moderate the Q&A portion of the program. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Click on the icon at the bottom of your screen and then type in and send your question. Please feel free to submit questions during the talk and we'll select a handful of them to answer. And a big thanks again for joining, and now I'll hand it over to David and Adrienne.
Thank you, Jane, for such a lovely, warm introduction. We couldn't be more thrilled to be here. And Jane, you're such a wonderful colleague. Thanks for moderating this this evening. And to our great colleague, Tim and Jackie, for putting this all together. We couldn't be more grateful to you. This is really a show that takes the entire museum to put together. It's a product of obviously lots of years of work on our part, but lots of years on the part of everyone at this museum to make it possible and to share it with you. And we're thrilled to talk to you a little bit about the show. We're going to probably have a disorienting, maybe tour of a disorienting show, or maybe a way to kind of orient us in a way that has been a very disorienting time. And we're thrilled to be able to talk about that with you here. If you have the opportunity, we'd love to have you visit it in New York. But we hope you also kind of derive a lot of interest and pleasure from all the great offerings that are online throughout the course of this project. So thank you. And maybe Adrienne, to kick off, you could talk a little bit about how we came by this title.
Amazing. Thanks, David. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, quiet as it's kept. It really comes from three different sources that you'll see as we go through the show is really important to us, that it was focused in a way that is interdisciplinary. And I think you really see that in terms of the voices that come together to sort of influence this title. The first being Toni Morrison. Quiet as It's Kept is in the first sentence of her book. And also there's a title from Max Roach's album of 1959 that was published in 1960 called Quiet as It's Kept. And thirdly, it is the title of an exhibition that David Hammonds did in 2002 in Vienna that featured the work of three abstract artists who were thinking around questions of belonging and of identity. And just to finish out, I should say that the Toni Morrison book, which the title is cited, is The Bluest Eye.
So we're going to, in some ways, hopefully give a little bit of a way through the exhibition for those of you who might not have had a chance to see it yet, and just talk about maybe some of the themes and intersections that Adrienne has introduced a little bit in the course of this talk. And we obviously want to save a lot of time for your questions. So the first thing that you'll see when you come to the museum on the corner of Gansevoort in Washington is this billboard by Raven Chacon. This is a photograph that he made at the Standing Rock protests in 2016. So one idea that was very crucial to the two of us when thinking about this show was about questions of belonging, place. Indigeneity is something that is woven through the exhibition. But also it's not limited to just this 2 or 3 year period. This is from 2016. It's an intergenerational exhibition. It's a show that has maybe older work than past exhibitions have had, because we thought that this time is one that's actually a reverberation of many past moments that have different resonances in the present.
And then we have this incredible project by Rayan Tibet. Rayan is an artist who was born in Beirut and educated in the United States, and is in the process of himself becoming a US citizen. And as part of that, which happened sort of as part of, as we were kind of working on this show, came up with this idea to kind of create a work based on the 100 questions from the civics exam around becoming American. And so you will see these sort of sprinkled throughout the building. They appear in sort of really surprising places. But it's interesting because I think about when I first came across, when we were in conversation with Rayan and kind of looking at these questions, I was like, wow, how many of these could I actually answer?
Yeah.
Like, could I actually pass this test?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I could. But it really is a reminder of the privilege of what it means to sort of not have to go through such a process, and the complexities, barriers, challenges that are very real for people who do.
Can we talk about Renee, since you've worked with her so much over the years?
Sure. And then we're really lucky to have Space Poem number 7 by Renee Green, an artist who's been so important to the Whitney's history, in particular was a highlight of the 93 biennial, but also has worked in the independent study program here at the museum, has a very long trajectory. So it's interesting that we wanted to sort of do what I call give a little bit of sugar with the medicine to go down, right? Like it really helps in a way. And these banners are a perfect example of that. They're really colorful and bright, and Mae Swenson's poetry is something that Renee draws upon in this work in particular, to kind of show and help us think about poetry and the poetics of everyday life.
In some ways, like we're jumping now to the 5th floor, and if you come or if you have seen in the lobby, there are also incredible works by Tony Cokes. Moved by the Motion has one of the more beautiful videos I've ever seen. That is their interpretation of Moby Dick, and an incredible performance that will be taking place in collaboration with the Shed
This coming weekend.
This coming weekend. Ellen, since you and Ellen are tight.
Oh yeah, so Ellen Gallagher. Here we are really lucky to have 2 new paintings by Ellen. These are sort of great examples of Ellen drawing upon a kind of hybrid, figurative, almost like mythical, very much rooted in West African iconography, but also with her kind of her deep knowledge of sea life and the whole worlds that exist underwater. And these are just made into this really beautiful abstract diptych that we're able to show, which were made especially for the show.
As you can tell, we're on the 5th floor of the building. Adrienne and I made a decision very early on to have this be light-filled, open, a clearing, precarious, kind of a way of making maybe different connections than we might not have made originally. We wanted to make it feel like the times in which we were living, different connections being forged. And it made us realize that we had this great talented crew within the museum that could help us realize that. Our exhibition designers and our great carpentry team that worked with us to form these armatures that the work is on. And this is a beautiful painting by Deani Whitehawk, who made this fully out of hundreds of thousands of bugle beads. Deani is very interested in fusing her Lakota heritage and traditions using these glass beads with her interest in modernist painting. So this fusing of cultures, traditions, intersecting of ways of working, and really thinking about beauty as a way of opening up different pathways to get to viewers.
I think we've got a close up.
Yeah, it's perfect. Great.
Dazzling. Yeah, and I think one of the things about this floor that's really interesting is, I like to say, how many times do you get like a 15,000 square foot sidelong glance across the room at something? And so there are all of these entanglements that begun to come together, and sort of the way sound functions, because it's open floor, a kind of cacophony that gets back to these ideas of how we want people to feel in the space, that reminds them of the conditions in which we were making this show. And so, here we've got Dwayne Linklater making this incredible canvas. They're actually teepee covers. And one of the things that Dwayne talked about a lot that was really, I think, resonated for us was how the Cree did not have a kind of ornamental application to their teepee covers as some tribes do, and that he wanted to imagine, in fact, what an ornamental cover would be, teepee cover would be for the Cree. And I think here we have a great example of like him using orange pekoe tea and charcoal and sumac and cochineal and blueberry dye, and subjecting them to nature, to the elements over time. And I think that's something that comes up on the 5th floor in particular, in this little constellation of works here. But maybe you could talk about Rick.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Lowe is an incredible artist that many people might know from his work at Project Row Houses in Houston, which is really a community gathering place for artists, but also for young mothers, for a place for gathering and community. It's also a way to preserve a neighborhood that's been a traditionally African-American neighborhood in the 3rd Ward of Houston. He started as a painter though, and he talks about a lot of the work for Project Row Houses, thinking around the domino table. And what you're seeing, if you were to like come here or see it in more detail, are different games of dominoes that he's taken photographs of, that made drawings of, that make size and made into an abstract painting that could also look like a topographical map. So how place and game and community are always interlinked. And that idea of community and place is very much alive with Monica Avriola's great photographs from Tijuana.
I mean, I find these so compelling actually, because they were captured in this moment of the sort of aftermath of the global financial recession, right? Like after 2008, 2009. And I feel like we were really concentrated on how it was affecting like communities and home prices here in the States. But I don't think there was a lot of thought about the sort of broader repercussions of such an incident. And so she captures this in neighborhoods that were in process. They're almost like these like modern ruins or contemporary ruins that we saw when we were in Tijuana that sort of still dot the landscape. But how people who rely so heavily upon crossing the border to make their living and conduct their lives, when that recession took place, that these, you know, great dreams around having their own homes kind of went away tragically. And so what you're left with are these kind of half-built structures. And Monica worked in a government office and was aware of this, and tracking this information was exactly what instigated her to kind of go and photograph these scenes.
And that's obviously a close-up of these works.
the great Ralph Lemon.
Yeah.
So we're super lucky because Ralph is showing with us for the first time in the context of the biennial, essentially a survey of 25 years of drawings, more than 25 years, it's maybe closer to 27 years of drawings, in which have been a part of his process of thinking and making dances and other kinds of work, video, very conceptualist, research-driven practice. And so what's happening is he's created a very specific choreography in which almost about on a monthly basis, we're rotating through different bodies of work, such that by the end of the run of the biennial, we'll have shown in 5 different presentations his entire survey of drawings. These look like paintings, but Ralph describes them as drawings. So it's important they have this kind of incredible reference from Black Joy to the greatest African Americans in history, like these really great titles, to really meditations that are drawn from his practice of Buddhism for many, many years. This is from the Black Joy series, which is being shown now.
And this idea of changing over, of having a word that Adrienne and I have used a lot to describe this, is when the show to have a metabolism, to make it feel like there's change happening. Frequently when we go to museum exhibitions, we think, oh, that's on the wall, it never changes. How did that happen? We wanted to bring that to life. Obviously, I've learned a lot from working with Adrienne, one of which is how to incorporate performance in ways that might be unexpected. It's not something that's just to be in the theater, but integrate in the life of the work. And this incredible project by Wilda Sterling Dupree is part of that thinking, which is, Wilda is an incredible artist and choreographer and dancer who is from Puerto Rico, who studied in the United States, who's equally influenced by traditions from Puerto Rico, West Africa, Merce Cunningham and John Cage. And in that elaboration comes up with something that's all of her own. So she made the beautiful drawings that are displayed in the gallery on site, blindfolded on a Saturday evening in the galleries, responding to the place. And I think this idea of having that performance, even if you didn't see it, you know something magical happened in that space.
Yeah, it has a real energy to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So here we have Ito Barada. Ito made a wonderful 16mm film on 2 projectors for the biennial. And it really looks at these sites that are located, I think she went to Chicago, also in Florida, where they are testing consumer products in like real life elements of exposure to the sun, to wind, to rain, to a whole host of things. And it's really, I think, one of the great examples of how we take what is an idea around abstraction in the show, in terms of like, how do we know what abstraction can do? What are the myriad forms that abstraction shows up in? And it shows it not only in the form or the medium of film, but it actually also shows it as a way to think about time.
Yeah. Yep.
And which has been something we've thought so much about in the show, is being suspended or sort of hard to grasp, or even maybe in the last couple of years feeling entirely unreliable, because our sense of it has changed so radically. But yeah, this piece by Ito is really spectacular.
And as Adrienne described, the idea of abstraction and all of its valences and guises and capacities to share and also withhold meaning is something that was very important to us. And I'll move quickly because I know we have a lot to get through, but this beautiful painted by Lydia Churchman is this kind of incredible fusion of both this interest in water lilies, the porosity, the openness to the elements, to the world, their own interest in Buddhism, this idea of being kind of a receiver and of information, but also a giver of it. But also this idea, when you look close, this grid, this influence of not just Monet, but Agnes Martin, a different way of thinking about presence and embodiment. The interest in Buddhism is really alive. The feet that they made with a great collaborator of theirs are the feet of a Buddhist deity, a protector deity that is made out of wood, and then Lydia has applied their own clear nail polish. So humor, real clarity, brilliance, space, light, love, all go into this work. And it's really a transition work that we've talked about between a focus on abstraction to this place that we've called sinister pop.
Sinister Pop. Here we have Alex. Why don't you talk about Alex?
Okay,
actually?
well,
I'm gonna hand that
I'll
over.
be very quick because someone needs to experience this in person. So this is an installation by Alex de Corte. It does not normally have stanchions around it, but one of the things about this piece is that it's called a Roy G. Biv for those colors, red, orange, yellow, etc. And his brother Americo is a house painter, will be painting it those colors during the run of the show. So that's the stanchions. But Alex has made this beautiful, heartbreaking piece about loss and heartbreak, using Marcel Duchamp staging the Brancusi Gallery at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is his hometown museum, to tell the story. So it becomes this work that uses artworks that we know, like Brancusi's Kiss, something very familiar to talk about something very personal, but also something very general. I think we saw a lot of artists really using personal narratives to delve into things that are very specific to them, but also in that way of working says something very general about the culture, or a collective consciousness, or even if you don't want to say that because all of us are such individuals, a way of hoping for the idea of collectivity when maybe that's hard to imagine, but hoping for it, kind of a utopian idea that would happen.
Kind of being towards.
Yeah, aiming
absolutely.
for it. Yeah. So this is just another angle. This is Alex de Corte, the artist, playing Rose Salavey, Duchamp's female alter ego. So
Yeah, we should talk about America coming in and painting.
yes,
Cubes.
yes. So 7 times she'll be here. April 20th, if you have plans to visit the museum or don't, he'll be here painting it orange. That'll be the next time. And it's a riff on John Baldessari's work called 6 Colorful Inside Jobs. He flips it inside out. It becomes something where the whole dynamic of the museum changes and the installation changes. So that beautiful painted by Harold Onkart will be a different thing when it's painted orange next week.
Next week, come and see it. And then we have Woody Diothello, an incredible artist who works primarily in ceramics, although we have 2 works in here, the sort of step ladder and the radiator, which are actually in bronze. But everything else in this kind of group of works is ceramic, and they're really lush and beautiful. And one of the things that Woody has been thinking about so much is sort of West African sculpture before the moments of encounter with Europeans. And so he's really also thinking about a lot of, in this work, about exhaustion and the sort of, and he approaches this through really objects that are really domestic, but here we see the body coming in really interesting and surprising ways. It clearly has a relationship to the Southern potters as well, of which there are many.
As Adrienne described Monica Ariola's work, Adrienne and I had a real interest in looking at questions around the border, both as something internal, psychological, but very real and lived and present. And Andrew Roberts is an artist whose great presentation of videos at the Biennial really talks to this exchange at the border, both between commerce and trade and capitalism, very much interested in NAFTA and the effects, a Nintendo company coming to Tijuana, and also the drug wars that he lived through and family lived through. The idea that the video game felt like real life and real life felt like a video game, this kind of entanglement, but also his use of this technology, these avatars, speaking poetry that he's written to talk about a hope for a liberation or hope for a state to get beyond that.
The great Jane Dixon. So thrilled to have Jane's work in this show. We're really lucky to be showing works from her Times Square period. Jane lived in Times Square and sort of photographed these moments of different scenes there that you see in the paintings. Here immediately on the left, those 2, the Apollo Terror Isles, but also 99 Cent Dreams. And then here on the right at the upper corner, Fascination. But Jane also is part of when she was much later driving up into the suburbs of sort of like Westchester, et cetera, would come across these sort of scenes of suburban life. And so that's when you begin to see these enter into the work, motel and save time. And Jane's working with such surprising materials. So some of these are on linen, some are on like astroturf. I mean, it's just like felt, which gives it a very different kind of sheen, shall we say.
Yeah. The great Sable Lee Smith. We have a lot of greats in succession, but Sable made this incredible work, which is a Ferris wheel made out of furniture that is employed and used in prisons. So what you're seeing are tables and benches that are kind of low lit. It's hard to see that here, but these are low-lying benches where one can see everything at the same time, tables where there's no way to kind of hide what can be seen. So it's made into a clockwork. This moves. She calls it a clockwork. It's moving very slowly. The idea of time is built into this work. But she also thinks very much about the idea of entertainment. How many TV shows are based on cops or a prison break, that it's become another economy to kind of play off of what itself is already another kind of economy, which is the labor and the work within the carceral system and the people obviously who are incarcerated. So this is a work that kind of brings those, in addition to the video that's in the background, brings those elements together in a work that is as seductive as it is mournful.
And here we have Emily Barker. So Emily made this really beautiful kitchen that just sort of floats there in front of the window on the 5th floor. And it's really a moment of reflection about her, their own position, their own body in relationship to the built environment and the expectations of what is considered and presented to us as normative, right? Yeah. Like you don't get to choose the height of your kitchen cabinets necessarily, unless you're custom building them, which has a whole other series of implications. But that from their position and being a person in a wheelchair, that this is set for the average height of a male at 5'9", as opposed to their body, and how that comes with it, almost to create staging a kind of situation of dissonance in relationship to the things that you need within your everyday life. And then I will just add death by 7,865 paper cuts. This is a stack of photocopied medical bills, as well as a life clear plan that Emily had from the years of 3-year period, 2012 to 2015. So that's a stack of debt, essentially, that you're looking at, which comes up in the show again, which maybe we'll talk about later.
Yeah, and obviously we can't talk about every artist in the show, but we did want to have Harold on Carte's piece here and wish him a happy birthday today.
Happy birthday, Harold.
That's a detail of Emily Barker's piece that Adrienne just described. And we're moving here to a section that Adrienne has kind of brilliantly conceptualized around the idea of a lush conceptualism. And maybe we'll save that for a more in-depth lecture, what that means. But this is a really wonderful presentation of photographs by Pa Hao Her, who's a photographer who works and lives in Minneapolis and is part of the Hmong community, an indigenous community from Southeast Asia. And what she wanted to do in her work is she really talks about creating a visual archive, pictures that she wants, desires, didn't have when she was younger that she wanted to create. So in this presentation, Adrienne and I asked her, what if we think about a changing rotation of things? Your 6 or 7 bodies of work that you've been working on for over a decade now, and change the installation during the run of the show so that archive can be made manifest and present. And lucky for us, she was very into this idea. So like Ralph Lemon's presentation, this will be changing during the run of the show. So if you visit now, you'll be able to see this version. The wheat pasted work on the wall will stay, the framework will go, and a new body will come in. So it's a way of kind of really thinking about a variety of work and really think about the exhibition as something that's alive.
I think with POW, we have what, 4 rotations?
We have 4 rotations, exactly. Speaking of rotations.
Speaking of rotations, Jason Rhodes, Sutter's Mill. So this piece is a bit of a face-off with our David Hammond's Days Inn, just out the window and situated in Hudson River Park. So Jason made this work. It was part of a larger installation, museum scaled installation in Germany called Perfect World in 1999. And I think when we were talking with Rachel Kadori, who had been married to Jason, and it was her who introduced us to this work because we were thinking through a lot of different things, and she really foregrounded, said, well, I think you should look at this. I mean, 2 years into the process, actually.
Very late.
Coming to understand the aims of the show, I think it became clearer. But this work is Sutter's Mill was the site where the gold rush happened in Northern California. And what happens with this piece is it is a kind of reimagining of it. It had been a capstone, if you will, within the exhibition of Perfect World. However, for this, Jason's intention was that it be taken apart and rebuilt over the course of the time in which it's shown. So we do that every Friday, thanks to the talents of a group of art handlers who've agreed to do this. And it's really indicative of this process of building some of the aims and dreams that we associate with living, and to do that repeatedly, the fact that it is required, it's necessary that we do it. The work is sort of never done.
So we were told that we have about 10 minutes left to get through this. So we're gonna maybe race through some of
right.
them, but this
Yeah,
is
let's do it.
Rose Salane's really incredible work called 64,000 Attempts at Circulation. These are all things called slugs, counterfeit coins, things that look like coins that people have used between 2017 and 2019 to get onto a bus. So you have to imagine each one of these coins on the table was something someone touched, either because they had to, that was the means to get on board the train, or they wanted to mess with the system, which is another, interesting way of working through things. But that she acquired through an MTA auction. And then she sorted these out, and each table has a different classification that she made: chance, religious space, place, blanks. So it becomes this really, in terms of collectivity, a piece that really talks about what the collective can be, how an individual almost becomes like a cipher for putting these things together and making a logic. And also, we're doing the show in New York City, to just think about what these slugs allowed people to get to, what jobs they were working, what places they wanted to be, creates kind of an imaginative community to quote people.
Endlessly expanding.
It's
right?
endlessly expanding.
The Teresa Hot Kung Cha. I mean, I think for David and I, one of the #1 artists on our list when we started working on the show was Cha. And mostly it had to do with just the ways in which Cha was indicative, emblematic of a certain set of ideas around experimentation and language and video and film with the body and text. And questions of identity and belonging. Cha had this incredible story as a migrant, as an immigrant to the United States, from South Korea, through various places, and just really showed different ways in which you could show up and withhold.
Yeah.
And so I think that in some ways she became iconic in the show, and was such a reference for so many other artists, that it was necessary and a pleasure to include her.
So here's the detail. And then we're jumping
I want
to,
this t-shirt.
I want that t-shirt too. How do we get them? Oh, very quickly, Charles Ray has a great installation of 3 new sculptures from 2021. Come and experience them. They hold space. They have their own gravitational field. That's really like wonderful to experience in the really important show that's up at the Met right now. And then we're on the 6th floor.
Oh, are we just getting to the 6th
Yes,
floor?
so
Oh,
it's
yikes.
hustle time.
Okay, Denise Tomasos. See the New York Times. I wrote about it.
It's great.
It's great. They're beautiful. We're so lucky
+1.
to have them. Yeah.
But give them a little love.
Well,
They're
I
so
think,
good.
yeah, I mean, I think that, no, we're quite lucky to have these paintings. We have Displaced Burial at Corte on the right, and then Jail is the painting on the left side. These were 2 works out of 3, a series of 3, that were dealing with questions of confinement, enslavement, and really showed, I think, was so essential for this show, because it was a really early example of trying to show how questions that are of the unspeakable, really challenging questions of, pain and suffering and violence, and could abstraction actually hold such events? Could it actually serve as almost like a container for feelings that were that deep and emotive? And so in a way, that's a question that is situated in this show. I think you see it with Dwayne Linklater as well.
Yeah.
You see it with a lot of the other artists, Veronica Ryan sculptures. But here, I mean, I feel like these paintings which are from 1993. So also in a way, we're annotating the 1993 biennial. There's a little bit of a thinking around the institutional history there that's very intentional, that made these really important to show for us.
Yeah. And then in some ways, that space or that void between the two incredible Tomaso's paintings, the space that Adrienne and I have called the antechamber. And so I won't describe it too much because it almost is a space without language in a certain way, but there are two objects and one sound piece there. The sound piece is by Raven Chacon, field recording from the Standing Rock protests. One is this artifact called Edison's Last Breath that's in the collection of the Henry Ford Museum. And it's something that Ford asked Edison's son to have in the room. Edison and Ford were good friends. This idea of preservation. And for Adrienne and me, this became something that was very metaphorical for all the reasons you can guess during this period when life and breath was something that we were thinking about very deeply, and also about preservation at this museum, at any museum. What do we choose to hold, preserve, retain? So this space is one for kind of reflection, withdrawal.
I talk about it as a space of reserve.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important that when people go, that they pay attention to what's there, because there's things that are easy to miss.
There are.
I think the sixth floor is very demanding in a way of time and attention. We have here Daniel Joseph Martinez, incredible analog photographs that there's sort of performances for the camera that really look at the implications of a post-human world, taking on these different characters, from Dracula to Frankenstein to I don't know, the X-Files. It just kind of goes all over the place in Westworld. Really a stunning, stunning, stunning masterpiece by Daniel. Adam Pendleton, this is a duet that I think we felt was really important to put together. We have James Little here. It looks like Stars and Stripes, Exceptional Black, that these paintings are grays or silvers and blacks. They are just different tonalities of black. And then Adam Pendleton's two new paintings, Untitled Days, that are sort of an extension of his We Are Not series of works that include language, but also just form and chaos and really lush, dynamic brushwork. Those are really great close-ups.
Yeah, beautiful.
Lastly, I'll just say Adam Pendleton made a new portrait for the show. This one is of Ruby Nell Sales. Ruby Sales has this compelling, incredible history. She is a theologian. I think one of her leading questions is to ask Americans, where does it hurt? Which for me is just very moving. But it's a great video about her life and the arc of her story, which included an Episcopal priest taking a bullet for her, and he died, and it really changed her life radically.
This is an installation by Wong Shui, and Shui in this work is, this is a work that they've made in collaboration with an artificial intelligence program, generative adversarial networks. I didn't know that term before working with Shui on this exhibition, but it really is this idea of kind of coexistence, codependence between the human and the non-human, but makes something kind of startlingly beautiful, immersive. And you'll see within this floor that with its black walls, with its black carpet, this change of mode and tone, and the way that, you know, the space also then becomes a kind of different sense of kind of withholding. This is a view looking up. So the Shui made this beautiful couch settee to be able to kind of lie back and look at this work that's made in this collaborative process.
We're down to 5 minutes. Jonathan Berger, this is an incredible installation of text that's drawn from a number of collaborations that Jonathan has had with others. An introduction to a nameless love. I'm not going to say more because I feel like it really needs to be experienced.
Yeah.
But this gives you a sense of just how really beautiful it is.
And Jonathan worked on the show originally with Participant Inc. And if you want to go on Participant's website to learn more about it, they have really great resources.
Thank you, Leah Gondratano.
Yeah. Here's a detail, all made out of tin. So this is a really great establishing shot of three artists in the show. On the left is Cy Gavin's painting Untitled Snag. In the foreground, the four photographs are by Guadalupe Rosales. Great photographer of East Los Angeles, really interested in depictions of East Los Angeles, where she's from, really thinking about community. The upper left-hand image is called Winter Solstice. It's where she shoots every year to honor the day that her cousin was murdered. And on the bottom right, that we'll see in detail, this incredible sculpture by Rebecca Belmore, Ishkode Fire from 2021, which is a ceramic work that was made using a sleeping bag to form a figure, but not made from any particular figure. This idea that could be any one. And then encased around her are bullet casings that she made, this kind of beautiful kind of drape around by burning in different elements, so that closer to the figure, they're very dark and smoky toward the edge, they're raw. So Ishkode means fire in Anishinaabe, which is Rebecca's language. And this idea of fire being something both of beauty and also violence, this kind of commingling of those ideas is very much present in that work. And this idea of obviously gun violence, which we too tragically saw today in New York, is very much alive in this work, in Guadalupe's work.
And here we have a beautiful new video by Coco Fusco that really is a meditation on Hart Island. As some of you may have heard during the pandemic, that many people who tragically died and whose remains were unclaimed were actually buried on Hart Island. But this continues something that has happened during pandemics in the past, including most recently the HIV/AIDS pandemic of the 1980s. So these precarious bodies, these vulnerable bodies, always somehow end up here in New York City, at least, on Hart Island. And Coco was thinking a lot about how artists have responded to pandemics over the years, going back obviously to the flu pandemic of 100+ years ago. So it's something that sort of links all of these things together, but it's really just sheer poetry and really beautiful.
Yeah.
And lastly, I should talk about here we have this installation for a gathering of tribes, a sort of communion around Steve Cannon, we should say. Tribes is an institution at this point, but like really this incredibly experimental generative space that I think is maybe one of the most interesting studies around collectivity. I was looking at their board meetings, videos of their board meetings. I mean, they really recorded everything, and we're very lucky because of the Fales Special Collections and Library at NYU. And of course, because of tribes, to be able to have videos from the entire history of tribes in the installation. But we're also very lucky and grateful to Mr. Hammonds. David Hammonds spent a lot of time there. I came to know the space through Butch Morris. But Mr. Hammonds, we have a wall that was extracted that he had originally made for tribes that is floating in the space with one of his hair pieces. We also have drawings of Steve Cannon that he did, Steve was blind. And then we have an incredible Steve's personal library in the show, along with the covers of all the different magazines and books that a gathering of tribes and their press, fly-by-night press, put together. The wallpaper is taken from the material, brochures, ephemera of every show that they did at Tribes. And instead of like putting in the show, we made the wallpaper from it.
And then our last slides are this great installation by Alia Farid that you'll see as soon as you walk down Gansevoort Encounter in the museum, particularly at night, because these light up, which you'll see like fireworks. Alia is an incredible artist who lives and works between Kuwait and Puerto Rico. And this installation really came about thinking about the history of palm groves and orchards, particularly in Kuwait and South Iraq. She'll talk about her father telling stories about visiting his mother in Southern Iraq when these palm orchards were lush and green and present. And then during the Hussein regime, when the dissidents would hide in the palm orchards, they were gutted, take out, extracted. So for Alia, it's really kind of this process of remembrance, of placing these kind of back in play to talk about that time when nature and dissidents were in alliance in some way. And also the fact that the Middle East is rife with these kind of fake palm trees in corporate parks outside of different places, all of which are bought and shipped from China, which is where Alia and the museum, thank you, Mara Hefner, acquired these, and our great team installed them on our rooftop. So it's beautiful. It's also extremely serious. It's melancholic, but it also has a quietness. There's a secret, and there's a quiet as it's kept quality to this work, which made it in some ways a great way to kind of announce the show to the world when you come to the building.
Yeah, and I think, like, thinking about Jonathan and Shui on that one end, this is the sort of on the opposite end of the 6th floor. It's definitely light at the end of a very dark tunnel.
Yeah. So there's lots more to see. We'd even, obviously, there's only so much time. There's 63 great artists and collectives. We love every one of you. So sorry if you're watching, we didn't get to your work, but we're happy to take questions. And Jane, thank you for moderating this part of the conversation.
Thanks for having me back. That was terrific. And not easy to walk us through the show in that amount of time. So really, really great. One question that's been, I'm going to jump right in with the questions. One question that's come up a couple of times is about the very distinct sensibility between the 5th floor and the 6th floor. And you talked about this a little bit, keeping 5 much more open and airy. So will you guys talk a little bit about that decision to do that, and why that was sort of such an important piece of the show?
I mean, I think, again, like we talked about how in making the show, we were trying to create a situation where we were very thoughtful about the context and the times in which we were making it. And I don't want to, I want to be very clear and say that it's not about like a black and white thing with the 5th and 6th floor, but rather it's more about a kind of sense of open, it's more about the sensuality of the spaces. It's more about having a sense of openness and possibilities that you can see beyond even the building. Like you can see onto the river, you can see out into the city, but that also you can see on the 6th floor that it is a labyrinth, right? And in a way, it's like you can almost think about it as like Borges's labyrinth, right?
Yeah.
And how it just has this possibility of even when you feel contained, that sense of containment can proliferate and extend often across different questions or ideas or situations. It's much more meant in that kind of intention, but they're really counterparts, right? And so in a way, they're like, there's always the good and the bad, the dark and the light.
Right.
So it's spaces of containment, openness. It's more about them existing as pendants that are deeply connected and inextricable from one another.
Yeah. And I remember at one point, it was before the pandemic and then intensified by it. We were thinking about the qualities of these exhibitions. I mean, Jane, you know it, you've staged like a beautiful biennial just a few years ago, but you have to find ways to kind of modulate what an experience is. We all go through museum spaces. I mean, I'll use an I statement. I feel it myself. I don't know where I am. I get lost. I forgot where I saw a certain artist. So we wanted to create also a scenario very practically where you're like, okay, where am I? I'm in New York City. I'm at the Whitney Museum of American Art. I'm looking at X artist's work. And if we could create a staging that both felt like the times in which we were living, precarious, pendant, cacophonous, silent, at moments, but also searing, like could we make an effort, and it's always an effort, who knows whether it succeeds or not, to create something that will live in the mind, and an artist will feel situated, and a viewer, an audience person who comes to see the show, we will feel situated in that place. That felt important. We did a lot of this over Zoom, over digital means, when the idea of being in a physical space felt like such a luxury, like such a privilege. That also came with it, like a responsibility to make it count. And like that's, Adrienne and I have done this work for a long time. We care about what people feel. We care about leaving it open for people to feel different things that we might not expect. And so hopefully the installation is also a possibility for that, an invitation.
Yeah. I like the idea that you kind of embrace the possibility of it being cacophonous, which is maybe sometimes people want to have the opposite impulse, and even that it's like going to require a lot of a viewer potentially, that Adrienne mentioned that before.
Yeah, it's super demanding. And I think
Yeah.
kind of okay with that, right? Like,
Mhm.
have these times not been extraordinarily demanding?
Right.
So I also wonder, like, who wrote
Mm.
the book and said that art exhibitions have to be silent? I mean, I've always thought about this. And I don't know who wrote that book, but someone who works in interdisciplinary work so much, I find it a little unnerving
Yeah.
to be in silent spaces. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that this was a great experiment on our part to try to kind of put some pressure on that.
Yeah. So a question that maybe sort of subtly builds off what you were just talking about, Adrienne, this idea of how we build exhibitions off of past things we've known or seen. A couple of questions have come up about historical exhibitions or curators that have been really influential for you guys, or that felt particularly influential for this show in particular. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Great question.
Great question.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to spin this out because David and I are historians. So I feel like there's so many that we looked at. It's like doing your homework. Yeah, I first want to kind of give a very big shout out to Lena Bobardi's work around thinking about the armatures.
Yep.
And the possibility, like it just as a starting point,
Yep.
almost like a license to kind of get beyond the wall.
Yep.
And that we could then take that and work with our exhibitions design team to kind of refine and get to a place where it felt good for us. I also, it's undeniable that the Whitney itself has an entire history that it's not a kind of navel gazing, but it's undeniable that you're doing, the show has happened in 80 iterations in this institution. So we can't ignore it either. So it becomes like thinking about the work of, Marcia Tucker, thinking about Elizabeth Sussman, thinking about Thelma Golden, thinking about so many, Jane, thinking about Jay Sanders. There are just so many people, Rue Hockley, who have worked on shows that have informed our thinking. There were very specific biennials in particular. I would say Marcia's Spirit was one that was very close to us in this time. But in terms of biennials, 93 is undeniable, 2012 for the space that it gave to performance and actually just to be more experimental with space was very important for us. In 1962, thinking about the Joseph Cornell exhibition that was a show within a show. These are all just really good, like benchmarks, if you will, to work with and thinking about how we could do what we did.
Yeah, and in addition to all those examples that Adrienne brings up, we wanted to think with a lot of artists, like they kind of, and the artists in the show in particular, who led us to certain ways, whether it's Jason Rhodes and this idea of the take up and take down, or the PA work that has this material presence, or Ralph really asking, what can you do? Like, are you up for this? Do you want to change this up? It's not just changing the work, it's changing the walls. It's being open to those things. Alex de Corte, changing the entire show each time his brother paints that cube. So I think it's this like incredible intersection of taking the lead from what we've learned from this historical work that we've done in the past to be being very present to the different nods that artists can give for what the show is. And then also something that Adrienne and I have talked about a lot, kind of owning the show as also our work and the museum's work. And you need to take some moves, like the antechamber, real estate is real estate.
Yeah, totally.
It's a decision to make a room that's mostly empty. And that's a choice that you make, and you have to own it, because you can say, oh, that 64th and 65th artist could have been in there, whatever. But it's also a place to say, what are your values and your commitments? And how do you stage a place that actually gives more room conceptually, emotionally, aesthetically for the other works around it?
But I do think a big shout out to the artist who allowed us, I want to say especially to those on the 5th floor who were completely down for this experimental ride that we wanted to take. And there was an incredible amount of generosity on their part to to be willing to do that.
Yeah, and just as part of that, the part of the process is we told them what were happening. It's not like the first day of the show they came and saw it. You know, Jay, do you know
Surprise.
that? Surprise.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
was a deep collaboration.
It's a deep collaboration. A deep
No, I'm
collaboration.
sure they
Yeah.
really believed in the vision.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time, but if you were comfortable taking one last question that came up and just pivoting maybe to this idea of this being a historical project, it being part of a long lineage of important projects, but of course it's always a very personal project that, you know, you guys are talking about, you bringing your touch, your authorship to this. Are you able to each share a kind of maybe key emotional moment for each of you in the process of making the show that really stands out, especially now that you're on the other side of having it installed and seeing it up?
Mhm.
It's such a great question.
That's a great question. I would maybe say there are two, and they're related in a way, at least spatially. Maybe getting back to that void thing. The first would be that very first Monday after the Jasper Johns show had been deinstalled. And it was the very first time that David and I, maybe it was a Tuesday, David and I were able to get on the floor when all the walls had been taken down on 5. And we could see for the first time what had existed as like a computer program or like a file, what that clearing really looked like. And it was kind of shocking.
Mhm.
And I would say the second moment for me would be when we installed works in the antechamber. Yeah, deeply, deeply moving, both of them.
Great to hear that.
I hope this doesn't sound too narcissistic, but it was 2 years ago now. It was my birthday. 2 of my brothers were in town, and my wife and Adrienne, and we had dinner together. This is still the height of the pandemic.
can't believe
We're
you're telling
eating
this story.
outside. We had too much wine and dancing outside at a restaurant. And it was just like, okay, all this work is deeply important to us,
Yeah.
but these relationships, they are what make the work possible.
Oh, that's true.
And you know, this idea that you become close, you enable, I think having these experiences along the way, when you go to that floor when it was empty, I had the same thought that after the Jasper John show was closed, that opening came after a lot of closings.
Some tough times.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah.
Tough times.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. And there's an incredible amount of enthusiasm for the show and the chat and the Q&A. So I think people will be really excited to see it, especially after hearing from you in such thoughtful detail.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. Hope to see you at the museum.
Thanks, digital team.
Thanks.
Thank you.